So Princess Charlotte just got a new title, and the way it happened tells you everything about where this family is actually headed. The palace confirmed it 3 minutes ago, but the announcement itself almost didn't happen because someone inside the household tried to delay the whole thing until after the next royal ceremony. Prince William refused. And honestly, the fact that there was resistance at all is the part that doesn't get enough attention. Before we go deeper, make sure to subscribe to Crown Watch so you don't miss a single update. Charlotte did not smile when the words were spoken. She sat beside Catherine, gripping the edge of her chair as pride, fear, and confusion crossed her face. The palace had named her royal guardian of the crown, a new role meaning she would become George's principal royal support, lead charitable duties, and represent him during emergencies. William watched his daughter absorb every word. The prince knew the succession plan, the blueprint deciding how duties and authority would pass to the next generation, did not threaten George's place as heir. His son remained first in line to inherit the throne. Yet the future king understood the cost. By protecting George from isolation, he had placed a burden on Charlotte that no royal daughter of her generation had carried so openly. A senior aide moved the sealed plan across the table. William opened it, reached the final paragraph, then read those lines twice. The clause gave Charlotte more than a ceremonial label. It allowed her to receive training, attend selected briefings, and step forward as George's deputy during a national crisis. Catherine turned toward her husband, searching his expression because she understood why those words mattered. The title could give their daughter purpose, but it could also take away the freedom of being young. William signed the approval and set the pen down, then he turned toward Charlotte. This title is not about standing behind George, it is about standing beside him. She looked toward Catherine before meeting her father's eyes, and the silence carried more weight than applause. The announcement had been released earlier than planned. Resistance had formed inside the household, and someone had tried to delay confirmation until after the next royal ceremony. William refused. Delay would invite interference, weaken Charlotte's position, and turn a family decision into a palace struggle. Congratulations began arriving, but one senior royal offered nothing. No message, no call, no public word. William noticed immediately, but before the palace could celebrate Charlotte's new position, William had to face the relatives who understood that her rise would quietly rearrange their own futures. Behind the polished palace statement stood a family facing an impossible emotional balance. George remained the future king, yet Charlotte had suddenly been given a title, carrying authority, duty, and public expectation. William saw strength in his daughter, Catherine saw the dangers that strength could attract, and George, still young enough to need his sister but old enough to understand succession, was forced to consider whether the person closest to him had just become part of the machinery surrounding his future. William had watched Charlotte for years. She noticed tension before others spoke, protected Louis without being asked, and understood when George needed support rather than advice. Those qualities convinced the prince that she could become his son's strongest ally. The new succession structure, the plan deciding how royal duties would be prepared and shared, was meant to stop loyalty from turning into rivalry. Catherine understood the danger immediately. The princess supported giving her daughter a clear purpose, but she refused to let the title swallow Charlotte's childhood. Royal children were often praised for strength, while quietly losing the freedom to make mistakes. She feared the palace would begin treating the siblings as symbols before they had learned who they were outside duty. George heard the truth before the announcement reached the public. William explained that his position as heir had not changed, but Charlotte would now receive training beside him. The boy listened, then looked directly at his sister. "Does this mean you always have to follow me?" he asked. Charlotte did not answer quickly. Catherine watched her daughter think while William remained silent. Then the young princess shook her head. "I don't want your crown," she said. "I just don't want you to face it alone." George lowered his eyes, relieved, but his mother turned away for a moment, unable to hide what those words had done to her. William then admitted the deeper reason behind the title. He wanted to prevent the painful spare dynamic, a pattern in which the child behind the heir grows up defined by distance from the throne rather than by a purpose of their own. Charlotte would not be pushed into the shadows or forced to compete for relevance. Catherine soon learned that several advisors had proposed separating the children's future training. George would have received constitutional preparation, while Charlotte followed a more limited public path. William rejected the proposal and rewrote the plan himself. He believed separation would weaken both children and repeat old family wounds. George finally crossed the room and offered Charlotte his hand. She took it. William looked toward Catherine, and she met his eyes with equal parts relief and fear. That quiet gesture between brother and sister carried more meaning than the palace announcement because it followed a ceremony where the family's hidden fears had first erupted into the open. The decision did not begin inside a committee room. It began during a royal ceremony 6 months earlier when one unexpected absence left Prince George exposed before hundreds of guests. As confusion spread behind closed doors, Charlotte stepped forward without instruction, calmed her younger brother, and quietly helped George complete a responsibility that senior courtiers feared would collapse. William watched every second. By the end of that afternoon, he understood that the monarchy had already revealed Charlotte's role before anyone had officially named it. George had been scheduled to deliver his first formal address during the Commonwealth Youth Service at St. George's Hall. The service was a major royal gathering designed to celebrate young people across Commonwealth nations. William was meant to stand beside his son, while Charlotte and Louis remained close enough to support him. Without sharing the central duty, everything changed minutes before George was called forward. Charles suffered a sudden spell of exhaustion, and William was taken aside to receive an urgent update. The program could not be delayed for long. Guests were waiting, officials were whispering, and the boy, who had prepared for weeks, suddenly realized his father would not be beside him. George froze near the entrance. His hands trembled, and his breathing became shallow. Charlotte noticed before any courtier moved. Catherine tried to reach them, but officials rearranging the order blocked her path for several tense seconds. The princess watched helplessly as her daughter stepped closer to George and lowered her voice. "You only have to take the first step," Charlotte told him. George looked at her, then toward the doorway. She walked beside him until the final moment and remained close enough for him to find her whenever fear returned. The address continued. The ceremony survived. What senior officials had expected to collapse was held together by a child who had never been assigned that responsibility. William returned before the end and understood immediately what had happened. He watched George complete the address, but his attention kept returning to Charlotte. Her calm had protected her brother without stealing his moment. That balance mattered because the future king would need loyalty without rivalry, and she had shown both instinctively. Later, William requested the original succession support framework, the private plan outlining how the heir and his siblings would be prepared for future duties. He discovered Charlotte had no clear path, no structured training, and no protection from being pushed into the shadows or exposed without preparation. After the ceremony, William knelt beside her and asked why she had stepped forward. "Because George looked alone," Charlotte replied. The prince rose slowly, changed by the answer. William left that corridor knowing what he intended to do, but the moment he placed Charlotte's future before the family, one confrontation threatened to destroy the plan entirely. The succession plan might have remained a quiet family arrangement had Queen Camila not challenged its most powerful clause. Behind the closed doors of a private palace sitting room, she warned William that Charlotte's new position could create confusion, weaken established senior roles, and provoke comparisons the monarchy was not prepared to manage. William did not raise his voice. He did something more decisive. He closed the folder, looked directly across the table, and made it clear that his daughter's future was no longer open for negotiation. Camila pushed the succession folder back toward him. The document was the formal plan defining how royal duties would pass to George's generation and how Charlotte would support him. She argued that creating a new title outside the familiar structure could appear to bypass Anne, Edward, and Sophie, all experienced working royals who had spent years carrying duties for Charles. William kept one hand on the folder. The prince answered that Charlotte's role was not a judgment on anyone serving the king. It was designed for the monarchy George would inherit, a smaller institution that could not afford to leave the heir isolated or his sister without a clear purpose. Camilla's voice softened, but the tension sharpened. She asked whether Charlotte was old enough to carry such expectation. William heard real concern, yet he also sensed something else, the instinct to protect an existing hierarchy that his plan would quietly reshape. Then the queen consort crossed the line. She suggested that Catherine's influence had made the proposal too personal, turning a constitutional decision into a mother's attempt to elevate her daughter. William's expression changed instantly. He warned Camilla never to reduce Charlotte's ability to Catherine's ambition. His wife had argued for caution, not power, and he would not allow her restraint to be twisted into manipulation. Camilla revealed more than she intended. During the private conversation, she admitted that several advisors had already asked Charles to delay the title until George reached adulthood. William realized the resistance was not limited to one room. It had spread through the palace before anyone had been honest enough to tell him. "The title will change the temperature of the family," Camila said, pushing the folder forward again. William slid it back toward himself. "The family has already changed. The plan simply admits it." The prince then disclosed that Charles had privately approved the principle months earlier. The only authority left was William's own consent as Charlotte's father and the future sovereign. Camila fell silent. William stood, took the document, and left. Moments later, the queen consort requested a private meeting with Charles, convinced the king could still soften or suspend the decision. The confrontation ended with William holding the document, but the final balance of power still rested with the one man whose signature could turn a family decision into royal history. King Charles understood that Charlotte's title was about far more than one child. Approving it meant accepting William's vision of the monarchy before his own reign had reached its final chapter. Rejecting it could fracture the future king's confidence and leave George without the support structure his father believed essential. Alone with the succession plan, Charles faced a deeply personal question. Should a monarch defend the traditions he inherited, or allow his heir to reshape them before time forced the decision upon them both. Charles studied two versions of the proposal in silence. The first followed the old model, keeping George at the center while leaving Charlotte with a looser public role. The second was William's revised framework, a formal plan defining how the next generation would share duty, training, and responsibility. The king understood why the difference mattered. Royal siblings without clear purpose had often been pushed into rivalry, resentment, or confusion. William entered, knowing his father would see more than constitutional language. The prince knew the plan touched older wounds, especially the painful distance between himself and Harry. Charles feared approval would look like an admission that the family had failed before. He also feared that rejecting it would repeat the same mistake with George and Charlotte. William chose his words carefully. He told the king that avoiding the past did not protect the next generation. His tone remained respectful, but Charles heard something new beneath it. This was not a son asking permission. This was a future sovereign defining the monarchy he expected to inherit. Charles looked again at the clause naming Charlotte as George's formal support. Then he disclosed a private memory from a documented conversation with Queen Elizabeth years earlier. She had warned that future royal daughters should never be treated as secondary simply because tradition had failed to imagine a larger role for them. The room fell silent. Charles finally approved the constitutional language, meaning the official wording that gave Charlotte a recognized place within the future royal structure. But he added, one condition: her education, childhood, and personal freedom had to remain protected until adulthood. William agreed immediately. The title would prepare her for duty, not trap her inside it. William left with the decision settled, but Charles remained behind. The king removed his glasses, touched the final page with one finger, and quietly said Elizabeth's name. 3 generations had met inside that signature. The queen who had warned them, the monarch forced to choose, and the heir determined to change what came next. Then Charles signed. The king's signature settled the question of authority. Yet the moment the palace began rearranging duties, the human cost of Charlotte's promotion became painfully visible. Before the announcement reached the public, Charlotte's new title was already changing rooms, schedules, and relationships. Advisors rewrote future ceremony plans. Security officials expanded her protection arrangements. Senior royals learned that certain responsibilities they had expected to retain would eventually transfer to the next generation. Yet, the most revealing reaction came not from a courtier or constitutional expert. It came from Charlotte herself when she discovered that one simple family tradition had already been altered because of the title she never requested. Charlotte received a new long-term training schedule covering constitutional history, diplomacy, charitable leadership, and duties connected to George. Constitutional training meant learning how the monarchy works, how official decisions are handled, and how a royal supports the crown during difficult moments. Future state occasions were also adjusted so she would stand closer to her brother, showing unity without suggesting competition for the throne. Then the first personal cost arrived. Charlotte learned that her next private school event would include extra protection officers. She would no longer enter in the same quiet way, and familiar routines would now be controlled by security. The news struck harder than any formal briefing. She closed her bedroom door, trying to hold back her frustration, but opened it again almost immediately when Catherine called her name. Catherine found her daughter alone, lifting the official briefing card from the desk as though she wanted to make it disappear. Charlotte asked whether the title meant everything ordinary had to vanish. The princess did not answer from across the room. She sat beside her daughter on the floor and told her that duty must fit around her humanity, not erase it. William heard what had happened and acted at once. The prince ordered security officials to reduce the changes wherever possible. He had approved Charlotte's position, but he refused to let palace machinery turn one decision into a complete loss of freedom. That mattered because the title was meant to give his daughter purpose, not make her feel watched every hour of her life. Anne supported the plan during a private conversation with William, but her warning was blunt. The Princess Royal told him Charlotte must learn how to refuse attention as firmly as she learned to accept responsibility. Service without boundaries, she said, could become another form of captivity. William carried those words with him for the rest of the day. He canceled one official meeting, set aside the remaining papers, and decided that the next conversation could not be between an heir and a future royal guardian. It had to be between a father and his daughter. The palace could adjust schedules and protection plans, but only one private conversation could determine whether Charlotte truly accepted the future William had chosen for her. That evening, William dismissed the aides, left the succession papers behind, and asked Charlotte to walk with him alone. There were no courtiers to shape their words, and no palace statement waiting to be approved. For the first time since the plan began, the future king admitted that he might have made a decision too large for his daughter. Charlotte listened without interruption. Then she asked one question that transformed the entire meaning of her title. Will George know he can still ask me for help? William stopped before answering. The prince explained that the title would not make Charlotte responsible for every problem her brother faced. Its purpose was to give her recognition, preparation, and protection if she chose to serve beside him. The role was not a command, It was a path, and she would still have the right to decide how far she wished to follow it. Charlotte kept listening, but her silence carried fear. William promised that no ceremony, advisor, or royal institution could force her to surrender the personal life she wanted. As she grew older, he had approved a title, not ownership over her future. Then the future king admitted what had truly driven him. He feared repeating the old pattern in which one child inherited purpose, while another spent years fighting to be noticed. Royal siblings had often been pushed into competition or left feeling abandoned once the heir's path became dominant. William would not allow George and Charlotte to inherit that wound. Charlotte finally spoke. She was not frightened of helping George. She was frightened that people would stop seeing her as his sister and begin seeing her only as part of the succession. The word meant the order deciding who inherits the crown. But to her, it suddenly sounded like a machine powerful enough to swallow everything personal. William offered to delay the public confirmation. Charlotte refused. The young princess asked for one promise instead. George must hear every major decision before the palace heard it. William agreed immediately. He also added a private family clause to the plan, requiring decisions about joint duties to be discussed with George, Charlotte, and Louis whenever their ages allowed them to understand. "You are allowed to change your mind," William told her. "Then I choose to help him," Charlotte answered. "But I want to stay myself." The prince embraced his daughter, finally understanding that her consent mattered more than his signature. Before they returned inside, he removed the official title briefing from his coat and folded it away. For the rest of their walk, he did not mention protocol again. Charlotte had accepted the title on her own terms. Now the family had to watch as the outside world turned that deeply personal promise into a national symbol. The palace announcement traveled across the country within minutes, but one moment outside Buckingham Palace gave the story its emotional power. As broadcasters repeated the words, "Royal Guardian of the Crown," a small crowd gathered near the gates. Among them, a young girl lifted a handmade sign bearing a simple message: "A sister can be strong too." Cameras captured it. By the evening, that image had become the defining symbol of Charlotte's title and of the monarchy William was attempting to build. Broadcasters explained that Charlotte's new position would support the future sovereign while leaving George's place as heir completely unchanged. The role gave her a formal duty beside him, not a claim against him. That difference mattered, because the announcement was designed to prevent rivalry, not create it. William's plan was soon described as the first clear blueprint for how his children might serve in the next royal era. Some commentators praised the decision as a bold answer to generations of tension between heirs and their siblings. Others questioned whether Charlotte was too young to carry a title filled with duty, pressure, and public expectation. Catherine watched the debate beside her daughter. At first, the princess said nothing. Then one commentator began discussing Charlotte as though she were a political tool rather than a child. Catherine reached for the remote and switched off the television. She told her daughter that public opinion could explain a role, but it could never define the person carrying it. Outside Buckingham Palace, the crowd continued to grow. The young girl with the handmade sign was lifted onto her father's shoulders as people around them applauded. That single moment spread across evening broadcasts because it expressed something the palace statement could not hope, that a royal sister might be valued for strength without being turned into a rival. William saw the image during a later broadcast and quietly smiled. Catherine noticed his reaction and understood what it meant. The prince believed the public had recognized the human purpose behind his decision, even if the debate around it remained fierce. Then a newspaper published the front page that changed the tone again. It showed George and Charlotte walking side by side beneath the headline, "The Heir and His Guardian." William rewrites the royal sibling story. George studied the photograph and looked toward his sister. He pointed out that the headline had placed her behind him, even though they had been walking level. Charlotte laughed for the first time that day. "Newspapers don't decide where I stand," she replied. George smiled, and the tension finally loosened. The country had delivered its reaction. But the final verdict belonged to George and Charlotte, the two children, whose relationship would ultimately determine whether William's plan succeeded. In the end, Charlotte's new title did not change who would wear the crown. It changed the way that crown would be carried. George remained the heir, but he was no longer being prepared for a future built around isolation. Charlotte received recognition, but not as a rival waiting in the shadows. William's succession plan gave both children something earlier royal generations had often been denied: separate identities, shared trust, and the right to face duty without sacrificing their bond. William gathered the family privately after the announcement. Catherine sat beside him while George, Charlotte, Louis, and Charles shared a quiet meal without advisors or formal speeches. The absence of ceremony mattered. This was no longer about titles written on palace paper. It was about whether the people carrying those titles could still recognize one another as family. Charles looked toward the children and spoke with unusual softness. The king told them that titles only mattered when they described service honestly. The royal guardian of the crown, the new role giving Charlotte a formal place beside the future sovereign, would mean little if